The next basic programming element I'll cover is the loop. So like conditionals were the way to start to structure your programs and make different decisions at different times. Loops are a way to repeat certain lines of code multiple times. And there's different ways to do this in Python. So if I go back to my example here. So basically in Python, if you're writing code and you want to temporarily disable different parts of your code, you use the comment. It's a hash or a pound sign. So if you put this hash in front of any line of code, it won't execute it in the script. So if we run this again, you can see that it didn't execute the print for the addition. And if you're working at idle, this is a lot easier. If you want to disable a whole chunk of code, you can select all the text and do comment out region. So now I'll start talking about loops, and there's different ways to implement loops in Python. The easiest is for syntax. So you basically say for a variable, so for I, and you can use anything here, but I is a pretty standard way to index loops. So for I, and then we use the range command. So I'll just show you here what range does. Range will basically give you back an array of numbers, and you specify the start and end point of that range within the parentheses. So if you say range 10, it'll give you an array of all the integers from 0 to 10. So here, if I just write one number, I'll go from 0 to whatever it is, but I can also specify that more specifically. So I can say, give me all the integers from 5 to 10, and it'll give me those. So you can use this range to very easily execute some command any number of times. And so for I in range 10, it'll do this 10 times. I can say print A. So you see here it's printed A 10 times. The reason we use this iterator is as it's looping through this command, it'll store the current number of the loop in this I. Okay, so instead of printing A, we can just print I here, and I will store the number of that iterator for each loop. Okay, if we don't want to use a range, we can actually specify which values of which array we want I to take. So instead of printing everything in the range from 0 to 9, comment this out, we can just specify the array. So we say for I in 0 to 4. Use the colon, and then we print I again. It'll run this loop however many times. It'll run this loop the number of times that there's elements in the array, and each time I will take on that value in the array. Okay, so this can be useful for running through pieces of code many times, and then also keeping track of what the value in the code is. So those are two basic ways to use a for loop, and the second way to do a loop is with the while command. So the for syntax will execute something a number of times. The while syntax will execute something while something is true. So here you use the conditional again. So you can say while I is smaller than 10, print I. So in order to do this, you need two things. First, you need to declare outside of this while loop what the starting point of I is. If you don't do this, basically Python won't know what I is. So you have to give it an initial value before you start to use it in the while loop. And the other thing you have to do, which is very important, is you have to manually increment I from the loop. So while for automatically gives I these different values, here if you set I to 0 and say while I is equal or smaller than 10, it'll do this infinitely and basically crash your program. So the easiest way to increment a variable is by using plus equals 1. So this is a shorthand in Python for, you can say I equals I plus 1. These are the same thing. It'll basically take I and assign it to the value of the current value of I plus 1. And this is a shorthand for taking that value and adding whatever. here you can put 2 or any number. So if you run this now, you see it's going through all the even numbers depending on what the incrementer is here. So while loops are pretty powerful, but they're pretty dangerous because if you don't pay attention, you can potentially set up a infinite loop that will crash your system. The most dangerous way to do this, but sometimes comes in useful, is this basic loop. So this loop will run infinitely by default. Basically, you're saying while true, that's a generic statement saying this will always come out true, so this loop will always run. And this you only use for specific situations where whatever happens here will eventually launch out of this loop. Okay, so that's the basic overview of loops in Python, and you can use these to add more structure to your code and repeat certain elements of your code a certain number of times.